Welcome to Assumption University's Christian Culture Series Gold Medal event. This is the highlight of our academic year and also marks the conclusion of our academic year. My name is John Capucci and I'm the Principal and Vice Chancellor here at Assumption University. Before we begin with this evening's event, I'd like to acknowledge that Assumption University resides on the traditional lands of the Three Fires Confederacy, comprised of the Odawa, the Ojibwa, and the Potawatomi. And we are honored and privileged to be able to work on these traditional lands. Today, this meeting place still is home to many Indigenous peoples from across Turtle Island. And as I mentioned, we are grateful to be able to engage and work with these Indigenous individuals from across Turtle Island. Assumption University was founded in 1857 as Assumption College. It is one of the most historic Roman Catholic institutes of higher learning in Canada. It's informed by the Basilian tradition, which seeks to empower individuals to cultivate goodness in themselves and others, embody discipline in their paths towards excellence, and recognize the importance of constantly pursuing goodness and knowledge throughout their lives. This evening, we are here to present Assumption University's highest distinction, the Christian Culture Series Gold Medal. This prestigious award was established in 1941 by Father Stan Murphy and Father W.J. Gwynnon in order to recognize lay Christians for their efforts in contributing to Christian ideals in modern society. The award has been presented to several distinguished individuals, including Singred Unset, Jacques Maritain, Dorothy Day, Marshall McLuhan, Barbara Ward, John Polanyi, Martin Sheen, and last year, Madame Michael Jean. This evening, we are very fortunate to be joined by several guests, and please join me in welcoming them. We are joined by Elder Mona Stonefish, Elder of the Three Fires Confederacy and member of the Bear Clan. Bishop Ronald Peter Fabro, Bishop of London and Chancellor of Assumption University. The Very Reverend Father Kevin Story, Superior General of the Congregation of St. Basil. I didn't put him in a corner for any other reason. There wasn't much space left, so don't imply things. Dr. Gordon Drake, Principal of Canterbury College. And Dr. Mary Lou Drake, First Lady of Canterbury College. Dr. Norman King, Principal of Iona College. Mr. Mike Salvaggi, Vice President, Academic and Registrar, St. Clair College. My brother, Mr. John Fairley, Vice President, College, Communications and Community Relations, St. Clair College, has just arrived. Ms. Lana Talbot, Heritage Coordinator, Sandwich First Baptist Church. Reverend Father Vladimir Vranic, Pastor of Grankania Serbian Orthodox Church. Father Dragos Julia, Pastor of St. George and Andre Romanian Orthodox Church. And we're also very fortunate to be joined by a past Christian Culture Series Gold medalist, Dr. Moira McQueen. Before we introduce our honoree, I'd like to invite Elder Mona Stonefish of the Three Fires Confederacy and member of the Bear Clan to offer greetings on this special occasion.
Habusu kahwani das nakas makwa dodem obskuna washendam gibiayang mampinong go gimanjirieng wewen visita yang mava Honourable Graydon Nicholas minwa mava madvid mampi chijiad mampi with London, Ontario kavinjavad midas mava kwawaden madvid Chimigwech gibiayin mampi. Chimigwech shanedugi ni angdashmanda kinabananga go atemkok mampi. Gimini angdashmanda bish. Where we jitayang, where we jiayang, where we gigdiang mampi nishnabamikan. Chimigwech gimi angdashmanda kinabana atemkok mampi. Minua kinabana garbiajik mampi nungo. Dashwen mangewigyo. Oxygen minwagyo garbiajik mampi nungo. Chimigwech gimi angdashmanda nabi. Minua manda nwewen. Winguna Jamnadugi Mingume Manda Nuewen, Pane we Nishnabamiang, where when we Shitayang Mapi King, where when we Jiyang, where when we Masayang, meanwhile we Wanjidiang Mapi Nishnabe King, Mapi Swe Skude Ejiawat. Chimigwech Jamnadu, Chimigwech, the Kanana, Leo.
Thank you, Elder Mona and Midwich, for giving your opening greetings and remarks. I also like to call upon our Bishop and Chancellor, Bishop Ronald Favreau, to offer greetings on behalf of the Diocese of London.
It's a great privilege for me to bring my greetings on behalf of all the people of our diocese. We're really privileged tonight in granting the Christian Culture Award to the Honourable Graydon Nicholas. When you look at the history of the Christian Culture Gold Medal Award and the people that were honored, I think tonight we have another very distinguished member of our country whom we're honoring. And it's very fitting. His own contribution to culture in Canada, and I think a culture of building up reconciliation and healing with Indigenous peoples. We can be very proud of that, and I'm really honored to be able to be with you tonight as Assumption University honors you with this distinguished medal. Congratulations.
At this time, I'd like to call upon Professor Jamie Kishko, who will read the citation for the Honourable Graydon Nicholas, and following that, the presentation of the gold medal itself. So, Professor Kishko. You're welcome.
Bonjour Ali. Ni last way Indigenous cause Dashkan Zibing and Dunjaba Jack and Dodam. So first of all, welcome to this territory. It's an honor to have you here. The Honourable Graydon Nicholas, or sorry, I'm going to go to my notes because I have his name phonetically spelled out. Wika Dutchmit, or he who likes to tell stories, has spent his entire career promoting Indigenous rights, legal traditions, and culture in several spheres of society. Mr. Nicholas served as the 30th Lieutenant Governor of New Brunswick from 2009 to 2014, becoming the first Indigenous person to hold this office. He is currently the Chancellor of St. Thomas University in Fredericton, being appointed in 2021. Mr. Nicholas was born on the Tobique Reserve in the Maliseet First Nations territory, where he also serves as an elder. In 1946, after falling through a frozen river, Mr. Nicholas's mother went into premature labor. She prayed to Our Lady of Guadalupe, the patroness of the Americas, and her son Nicholas was saved. He went on to earn a Bachelor of Science degree from St. Francis Xavier University, a Bachelor of Laws from the University of Brunswick, and a Master of Social Work from Wilfrid Laurier University. Mr. Nicholas was the first Indigenous person in Atlantic Canada to obtain a law degree. Following his education, Mr. Nicholas worked with the Union of New Brunswick Indians as legal counsel, chairman of the board, and president. There, Mr. Nicholas successfully helped defend Indigenous treaty rights at the Supreme Court of Canada. From 1989 to 1991, Mr. Nicholas was the chair of Native Studies at St. Thomas University, where he taught an array of courses. And in 1991, Mr. Nicholas was named a provincial court judge for New Brunswick. During his judicial career, he served as co-facilitator of New Brunswick's Aboriginal Task Force on Aboriginal Issues. He stresses the importance of restorative justice, collaboration, healing, and transparency. Mr. Nicholas is a 4th degree member of the Knights of Columbus and serves as the assistant to the Supreme Knight on Canadian and Indigenous Affairs. Mr. Nicholas is a recipient of the Order of Canada, Order of New Brunswick, and Benemerente Medal. He has received honorary degrees from St. Francis Xavier University, Wilfrid Laurier University, Mount Allison University, and the University of New Brunswick. He has been married to Elizabeth for the past 53 years and is the father of late Michael and Brian and 2 grandchildren, Cato and Allison. Mr. Nicholas is devoted to Our Lady of Guadalupe, seeing her message as a pathway to reconciliation and a bridge between all people. Principal Capucci, it is my pleasure to present the Honourable Graydon Nicholas Wika a Dutch Mitt and ask that he be presented with the 2022-2023 Christian Culture Series Gold Medal.
For ensuring that Indigenous voice is heard in society, particularly in legal spheres and orders, for outstanding contributions to teaching and sharing knowledge, and for constantly and publicly exemplifying Christian ideals in his professional life, I call upon the Honourable Graydon Nicholas. In the name of Assumption University, and upon recommendation by the Board of Governors, it is my privilege as Principal and Vice Chancellor to present to you the Honourable Graydon Nicholas, the 2022-23 Christian Culture Series Gold Medal, with all the rights, honors, and privileges therein. Congratulations. I now invite the Honourable Graydon Nicholas to present his brief lecture. Congratulations.
Got 15 pages here. Well, first of all, thank you very much for this wonderful honor that you have bestowed upon me. I told my wife I'm going to get a gold medal. I said the most I've ever had was a bronze, and that was running, running away from the authorities. No, I'm just kidding. So thank you for that beautiful prayer that you gave us at the beginning. Elder Mona, if I can just call you Elder Mona, Stonefish, and also for the introduction. I just met her, but we have a mutual friend, her cousin, Del Riley. And Del Riley, when I first met him, we were working as researchers in Indigenous rights, treaties, and everything else, land claims, back in the 70s. And then later on, we were both presidents of organization. His was the Union of Ontario Indians, and mine was the Union of New Brunswick Indians. And then later, when he got elected as, at the time, president of NIB, National Indian Brotherhood, he was a great friend and great ally to have. So we go back a long, long way with very fond memories. And so also it's beautiful to be here with you. This morning I went to Mass at the Assumption Church, and Father is here. There he is, and he's a beautiful Mass. And I talked a little bit after, and I said, look, I like your vestment. On one side was Our Lady Guadalupe, and on the other side is of our faith. So, but it was a nice walk from where I'm staying. It woke me up by the time I got there. So I'll try to be as brief as possible. And then, of course, also, it's nice to see so many of you here for this wonderful event. And when John picked me up at the airport last night, he said, the Assumption University was originally founded by the Jesuits, and then the Basilians were involved as well. And I said, well, I'm kind of associated with the Jesuits now, with Christian Life Community, which is the Ignatian spirituality. My wife and I have been members of CLC since 1985. And so, but the Basilians also were very predominant in New Brunswick because they're the ones responsible for St. Thomas College when it was originally in the Miramichi area, and my older brothers went to school there. And then of course later on when the university was moved to Fredericton, it was different order of priests who were involved then. Excuse me, sorry about that. And of those different faiths who are here, it's great to know you're here, you know, and it's really wonderful. Goes to show you, I guess, the beauty of Vatican II, when we said, okay, how do we get along as faith communities in the world? And so that is still challenging. I want to begin my presentation by quoting from Matthew 28, verse 19. Go therefore, make disciples of all nations, baptize them in the name of the Father, of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. And because I did research in 1969 after my first year law in Toronto, I was assigned 3 responsibilities. Number 1 was to look at the land issue in the Maritimes, in particular treaty rights, and also because I was the only Indigenous law student across Canada at the time, and Catholic, so they said, okay, we want you to deal with the Spanish contact with the Americas. And I knew absolutely nothing about that particularly, because I'm not a student of history, right? My background is science and law. I couldn't believe what I read. I just could not believe. And of course, you all know the tragic consequences of that contact of the beginning of evangelization. Because this, in fact, is what the King of Spain was told to do. Go out and evangelize. Go out and make these people that you will encounter to be followers of Jesus Christ. Unfortunately, that did not happen because the military, unfortunately, were, well, I'll put it mildly, they were not very Christian, I'll say that, but because they made Indigenous people into slaves. And one of the things that the military did not want Indigenous people to be baptized, because once you become a Catholic, you couldn't be made a slave. So it was in the military's interest then to keep Indigenous people not become Christian. This would then justify them to say, okay, then we in fact have no problem making you almost like beasts of burden. So this research that I did, I couldn't believe what I was seeing and what happened. But you know, in that stage, am I talking too fast, or can you hear me okay?
I think the microphone, Graydon.
Bring it forward.
No, I think I don't know if it's on or it went off.
Oh, can you hear me okay? No. No? Okay, I'll need somebody to, I don't know how this works. I can speak louder, I guess. But.
That's not functioning.
Well, I'll speak louder.
How's that?
How's my judicial? I'll put on my judicial voice and say this is a. It's funny. I'll just give a little bit of comment. You remember?
Someone that can help here.
Oh, he is. Oh, good. We've got a technician here. Okay, there you go. My chat room. You had it working before you came here, sir.
I didn't break it.
I can speak louder. Okay. All right, I'll speak louder. I won't start from the very beginning, but I just want to tell you about this kind of a setting like this. You know, when I was provincial court in New Brunswick, you'd go all over the place, and in some of the smaller communities, you'd end up having court in a legion, and out in the country. So we ended up having court in the legion, and there was always a lot of people, and I was impressed by the turnout of the people. But they were waiting actually for the court to finish so they could order the tap. So, but I guess when I tried to explain to you what was happening in the 1490s and the 1500s, but there were some people who were voices, what I call voices in the wilderness. And so often in our Catholic faith, none of this stuff is really taught. unless you take my course. But as early as December 21st, 1511, a Dominican priest by the name of Fray Montesinos was in a sort of like a church half the size of this, jam-packed with military and other people, and he challenged them because he had seen the abuse that was taking place and the consequences. And here's what he said. Tell me, by what right of justice do you hold these Indians in such a cruel and horrible servitude? On what authority have you waged such detestable wars against these people who dwelt quietly and peacefully on their own lands? Wars in which you have destroyed such an infinite number of them by homicides and slaughters never heard of before. Why do you keep them so oppressed and exhausted, without giving them enough to eat or curing them of the sickness they incur from the excessive labor you give them? And they die, or rather, you kill them in order to extract and acquire gold every day. Can you imagine if you were in that church, jam-packed, and then you had a priest challenge you, because this was the time of the fourth Sunday of Advent. And so that shocked the military. The first thing they did, get rid of this priest, they send him back to Spain. Fortunately, one of the persons who was there was a man by the name of Bartholomew de las Casas. And Las Casas, of course, had been sent to that area to make his father rich, because he was a merchant in Spain. And he sent his son there, go and establish so we can be wealthy. And he did, but that homily shook him up, because he also had some slaves. And so, but he decided, I'm going to become a Dominican priest. And he did. And later on appointed as a bishop. Now he again tried to make interventions in Spain to convince the king of the day that this unjust treatment of indigenous people must stop, because we're supposed to be there as representatives of Jesus, a man of peace, and we want to have these people be followers of Jesus Christ. Well, he didn't succeed too much either, because back in Spain they were actually debating among all the philosophers and the professors, are indigenous people in fact human or not? And this debate took place. It never did resolve it, other than two camps involved. One of the persons, however, who gave advice to the king was a man by the name of Francesco de Vittoria, who was a professor of theology at the University of Salamanca. He challenged the king of the day. He says, first of all, the Pope has no authority to give you land. You have to respect these people, because even in the Old Testament, people still have land rights. People are still human beings, and people have a right to exist. And again, the king didn't like that at all, so thank you, and boom, out he goes. But you know, Vittoria was a man of principle. And this is what intrigued me about my study. I never knew about this. But he walked to Rome, convinced the Pope of the day, Paul III, in 1537, to issue a papal document which recognized the humanity, land rights of the indigenous people, even if they were outside the faith of Jesus Christ. And he said any actions that the church did was null and void. Well, null and void is a good legal term. But when I saw that, I said, wow, actually people were speaking up for indigenous people. And of course, the king didn't like that either. I mean, how's the Pope going to enforce on that when the king has all the power, right? Control the military. So it kind of disappeared, this document. Fast forward to how evangelization began in this country. It started on the East Coast. Interestingly enough, that's where it would be. That's where the contact began. And on June 24th, 1610, the Grand Chief of the Mi'kmaq, Henri Membertou, got baptized by a French missionary, and he decided to become Catholic. So what convinced him to become Catholic? It was the fact that the missionary said, Jesus is a man of peace. Guess what? Jesus also has a grandmother, St. Anne. And for indigenous people, grandmother has a very important function, like our elder here, you know, because they know how family functions. They've raised kids. So now the grandchildren are a gift from our Creator, And this is how we would treat them. So it was on those bases then that member 2 said, yes, I'll become Catholic, but I want you as missionaries to learn the Mi'kmaq language. I want you to go and explain to my people that Jesus is one of us. And isn't that what incarnation is all about? I mean, why did Jesus become, why was he born? Why did he become human? Because his dad sent him. So he, in fact, is one of us. And that's why they convinced the Mi'kmaq. Jesus is, in fact, Mi'kmaq. Now, that's a beautiful, beautiful start of evangelization, right? Extremely. And my own people, the Wolastoqey, also accepted that as well. Somehow, between that stage in the early 1600s to when the government got involved, this was all forgotten. And with tragic consequences. And I'm talking about residential schools. You know, when the Prime Minister at the time, MacDonald, heard about what the United States government was doing, as early as 1819, the United States government set up Indian boarding schools in the United States. They created about 365 of these across the country. And it was intended to kill the Indian and the child. Let's civilize them. That was their intent. So Prime Minister MacDonald heard about what was happening. He sent down an envoy and came back and says, we can do the same thing in this country. So that's why residential schools were set up in this country. To remove the children from the communities, from the families, with devastating results. But it was also with the force of law, because it was the Federal Indian Act, which as the police at the time and Indian agents forcibly would remove these children. And if there was an objection by the community or by the family, they were charged criminally. That's the force of law that the government had. And we don't know about that unless you study it, like I do, and I teach it, and I tell my students about it. But now we're shocked because of these unmarked graves that were involved, that were discovered in Kamloops. And the public couldn't realize what was going on here. So that shocked and shook our church. And it wasn't just our church who was involved with the creation of residential schools. It was the Catholics, Anglicans, United Church, Methodist, Presbyterian, and a Baptist church up in Yukon. From Alaska reached out. So those were the denominations that were involved then in what has been called cultural genocide. And why cultural genocide? These children were moved when they were as young as 4 years old and kept in these schools till they were 16. So when brother and sister came together in a residential school, they were separated. They were not allowed to have any kind of a sibling relationship, and they didn't allow them to speak their languages. There were no celebrations of birthday. There was absolutely no love. So when you bring children up in that kind of a atmosphere, what's going to happen? Tragically, unfortunately, addictions resulted from this. Intergenerational effects. I mean, how was a young woman going to learn how to be a wife and a mother? And how was a young man going to learn how to be a father and a husband? Not in that atmosphere. So their language was lost, their culture was lost, and they were lost. So this is what we call intergenerational effects that resulted from that. And when we stop and think in a span of 100 years, there were 130 of these residential schools that were created, 150,000 in First Nation, Métis, and Inuit students went there. And those children were just a fraction of the children that were born. So they came out, they didn't know their language, they could speak with their people, and unfortunately, there were tough times. Now that is unfortunately what we call the dark history of our Christian faiths, especially for those who are involved, with tragic consequences for our people. So how do you in fact have a resurrection from that, or the rising of the phoenix, which is people say, from the ashes of despair? Well, it's prayer. And our people have always been prayerful. That's why I like the beautiful words that you spoke here ahead of time in your introduction and prayer. Probably a lot of people did not understand that you offered prayers. I did. And I'm grateful to you for that, very much so. But the thing is, now what do we do as people in this country? You know, when at first, okay, you've had a number of statements by the religious orders, I'm sorry, this shouldn't have happened and all this, which is good. But the last residential school in Canada closed in 1996. That's not that long ago. So now, thank goodness for the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which released its calls to action in 2015. One of them, number 58, said we want the Pope to come to Canada and apologize for the role that the Catholic Church stayed. Didn't ask for the Archbishop of Canterbury or any other head of the other nations, religious, but it said the Catholic, because the Pope is the leader of the Catholic faith. And well, there was a little bit of meeting with Pope Benedict, and then they said, okay, Pope Francis, would you come? It was only because of the visit of the Indigenous representatives and the Catholic Church that went to Rome last year in March 28 to April 1st, 2022. And Pope Francis heard the stories of these residential school survivors. And he realized what happened, and he condemned what happened. And I just want to give you a little bit of his words that he said at that time. And a lot of them, you know, but the stories convinced him he's got to come to Canada. So here's what he said. Over the past few days, I have listened attentively. Can you hear me okay now when I talk about it? To your testimonies. I have brought them to my thoughts and prayers and reflected on the stories you told and the situations you described. I thank you for having opened your hearts to me and for expressing by means of this visit your desire for us to journey together. Great harm was done to your identity and to your culture. Many families were separated and great numbers of children were victims of these attempts to impose uniformity based on the notion that progress occurs through ideological colonization. Listening to your voices, I was able to enter into and be deeply grieved by the stories of the suffering, hardship, discrimination, and various forms of abuse that some of you experienced, particularly in the residential schools. I feel shame, sorrow and shame, for the role that a number of Catholics, particularly those with educational responsibilities, have had in all these things that wounded you. In the abuses you suffered and in the lack of respect shown to your identity, your culture, and even your spiritual values, all these things are contrary to the gospel of Jesus Christ. So from the very beginning then, you could see then, right, the arrival of the Spaniards, and then continued in the United States, America, and also Canada, how somebody forgot to look at the Bible. Somebody did not stand up. There were no voices in the wilderness like we had at the time of contact. There's not one person involved in the Christian faith who said this is wrong, this shouldn't happen. You have to shape the history books to find out how many stood up. Because you see, at one time when the government controlled the legislation, anybody who spoke against government policy, if you're Indigenous, off you go to jail. And the government prohibited Indigenous causes to be contested in the courts of law. And they would say, you're a lawyer, off you go. It was against the law. So this is amazing. No, I mean, I had a legal career as a lawyer and a judge, and I defended people to the best of my ability. But I was never told, Graydon, I don't want you to represent this person. I mean, I was hired full time, thank goodness, but our people could not afford lawyers. So you can see then the situation that happened. Who was going to speak up? Was there a voice out there that would shape the consciousness of this country? And I just want to say, Now, I'm not a political person. I've never been involved with any political party and probably never will. I mean, after all, I'm 77 years old now, so I don't think I want to start a career in politics. But here's what Prime Minister MacDonald said in 1883. When the school is under reserve, the child lives with its parents, who are savages. And though may he learn to read and write, his habits and training and mode of thought are Indian. He is simply a savage who can read and write. Pretty devastating words for the Prime Minister of Canada, right? But he needed to say those words to justify what he had implemented. It has strongly been imposed upon myself as head of the department that Indian children should be withdrawn as much as possible from the parental influence. And the only way to do that would be to put them in central training industrial schools where they acquire the habits and thoughts of a white man. It's that civilization that the Americans implemented in 1819, surfacing a little bit later in Canada to justify that what the government was doing here was right. And when you read through this stuff and when you do research, you can't help but say, shake your head and say, my goodness gracious, wasn't there anyone out there who was speaking for our people? But I'm glad Pope Francis did listen to the Indigenous voices, and he agreed to come to Canada for his, what he called penitential pilgrimage. And he continued to say how sorry he was to hear firsthand other stories of what was happening in these residential schools. He couldn't believe it. And he said, this is not right. This is not right. What can we do? And, you know, when he appeared, as we know, he came to Massachusetts in Edmonton first. I have come to your native lands, he said, to tell you in person of my sorrow, to implore God's forgiveness, healing, and reconciliation, to express my closeness and to pray with you and for you. We want to walk together, to pray together, to work together, so that the sufferings of the past can lead to a future of justice, healing, and reconciliation. So this was his theme throughout the visit when he went from Edmonton, different sites in Edmonton. He went to the Sacred Heart Church, which is an Indigenous-run Catholic church. And if you're ever in Edmonton, visit it. It's beautiful. And it's got Indigenous symbolism, but I guess significance, because when we talk about a term called enculturation is how do you bring in Indigenous spirituality into our Catholic faith? And that's nothing new. The Greeks have been doing that for a long time. It influenced our early church. And if the Greeks can do it, I always say, well, why can't Indigenous people do it? That's the precedent I'm always looking for, you see. And I don't mean any disrespect to any other cultures. But he said that, you know, there was an interesting symbolism in that church at Sacred Heart. I've been there a number of times. I'm not sure if any of you saw this, but if I would encourage you to go to the website papalvisit.ca. All these pictures are there, and all the speeches that the Pope has given. But I like them all, but this is the one about trying to compare a teepee that Indigenous people used and the symbol of the tent of the meeting that's mentioned in the Old Testament. Here's what he says. Here in this church, above the altar and tabernacle, we see the four poles of a typical Indigenous tent, a teepee. This teepee has deep biblical symbolism. When Israel journeyed into the desert, God dwelt in a tent that was set up every time that the people stopped and camped. It was the tent of the meeting. The teepee reminds us that God accompanies us on our journey and loves to meet us together in assembly, in council. And he quotes from the Gospel of John, chapter 1:4. He literally pitched his tent among us. God is a God of closeness, and in Jesus he teaches us the language of compassion and tender love. That is what we should call to mind every time we enter a church. So you can see then how he has brought the symbolism of our people, of a home, a teepee, and then said, okay, it's also the tent of the meeting, which now, of course, we have as the tabernacle in our Catholic faith. So that, when I saw that, and I said, wow. When I heard it, I said, wow, that's something. And of course, as he continued his journey throughout Lac Saint Anne, and later on, of course, in Quebec, I happened to be there when he met with at the Citadel in Quebec, because I was a former lieutenant governor. I got invited by Governor General to be there in the audience when the Pope came there. And along with it, and there were a lot of residential school survivors who were there. But on the morning of July 29th, when he sat down with the residential school survivors from Ontario east to the Maritimes, that's how they did it. And he says, I have come in a spirit of penance to express the pain that we carry in our hearts as church for the wrong inflicted on you by not a few Catholics who supported oppressive and unjust policies in your regard. I have come as a pilgrim, so that progress may be made in the search for truth, so that the process of healing and reconciliation may continue, and that the seeds of hope will be sown for future generations. So when you hear the head of our faith, head of our Catholic Church say that, I mean, that's encouraging. But you know, when Pope John Paul II, St. Pope John Paul II, he's a saint, when he came to visit Canada in 1984 and 1987, he reminded us that Christ is in his own body is Indian. He's indigenous. And he also said, what my predecessor, Pope Paul III, said in 1537, I am affirming that, and that has always been the teaching of our Catholic faith. When I heard that, I jumped up, because this is the work I was doing in research back in 1969. And I said, wow, there's great hope then for our faithless Catholics to be brothers and sisters. But unfortunately, it didn't happen. So now with Pope Francis affirming all that, you and I, or today's generation, what are we going to do with that message? Is it going to be nice in a book, in the library somewhere? Or how do we bring these words into our hearts, indigenous and non-indigenous alike, so that in fact we can be brothers and sisters in Christ? Because we're created in the likeness and image of God. That's what the book of Genesis tells us. So then, we're all brothers and sisters, because it's the Creator who put us on this beautiful earth. There's other stuff I was going to read here, but I'm conscious of time. And I'll stop with this. I won't stop here, but anyway, I'll just put things in. You know, when I guess because I'm a very strong believer of our Catholic faith as an indigenous person. And often people tell me, Graydon, how can you still be a Catholic and be indigenous? I said, well, Hitler was a Catholic. The King of Spain was Catholic. The King of Italy, the leader of Italy was Catholic. And all those atrocities happened. It's not the fault of Jesus Christ. It's the fault of the weakness and of the humanity of these leaders that was there. So how do we recover from all of this, you see? So at Lac Saint Anne, here's what he said, which is a message to each and every one of us, not only gathered here, but throughout the country. Because this involves not just Catholics and indigenous people. These involve every citizen in Canada. And that's what the TRC says. In order to be reconciled, we have to involve everybody. So here's what he said. When looking at the indigenous people and thinking of their history and the pain that they endured, what do I do for indigenous peoples? Do I merely listen with curiosity, horrified by what happened in the past, or do I do something concrete for them? Do I pray, meet, read, support them, and let myself be touched by their stories? So that message, I hope it doesn't fall on deaf ears, like the words of St. John Paul II in 1984 and 87. It can't. We have to hear these words from the pulpit by the hierarchy. We have to hear it on the streets of the politicians and everybody else to say, how do we reconcile? How do we respect Indigenous identity? The languages, the beautiful prayer, you prayed in your language. And that was one of the intents of the government, to destroy that language. Thank goodness they didn't succeed. But we also pray in a different way in our languages. Just, the prayers are as beautiful as any other faith, believe me, they are. So why can't we bring them into our Christian faiths or other faiths that are in this country? Because that's what enculturation is all about, you see. It's not a matter of one culture being superior over another. It's not a matter of one language being superior to another. It's not a matter of one faith being superior to another. After all, we are all brothers and sisters, no matter what we look like. Men and women, children, elders. So this is what I find at Pope Francis. And you know, you've heard, I'm glad you mentioned about Our Lady Guadalupe. John, you know, my wife and I have been devoted to Our Lady Guadalupe since 2005. When finally the bishops of Canada were convinced, a long struggle, by Indigenous people who were involved, why can't we have one day in the liturgical year of the Catholic Church be designated as National Day of Prayer for Indigenous people? I mean, there's 365 days. Can't you find one somewhere? Or even the leap year, there's an extra day we got. So this was an uphill struggle we had as Indigenous Catholic representatives in meeting with the bishops and others. Finally, we broke through, and on December 12th, 2005, yes, we celebrated the first time the National Day of Prayer in solidarity with Indigenous peoples in Canada. And we continue to do that. And we said, because of the feast of Our Lady Guadalupe. Because when the Indigenous people in Mexico were struggling, again in that oppression, Jesus sent his mother to meet Juan Diego, speaking his language, and she appeared as a mestizo. Mestizo means half Indigenous and half Spanish. And she upheld Juan Diego, who had only become a Catholic in 1525. So 6 years later, she appears in front of him and says, I've heard your cry, I will do something. You know, it's difficult. I used to be a mathematician, but from 1531 to 1541, there were 9 million conversions into the Catholic faith by the Indigenous people. 9 million. You know, that works out about 1,700 baptisms every day of the year. 365 days a year. So it can happen, and a healing, it can happen again. So I am a great, not only follower, but I love Our Lady Guadalupe. And I'm called the chauffeur of Our Lady Guadalupe when I go around talking about her with her image. And I think that's the proudest title I got. She's in the back of my vehicle, doesn't say anything, but gets me where I gotta go safely, and then get the message I have to get out to the people. I always play with those words, but when I shared the story of Our Lady Guadalupe with my cousins who were in residential schools in Sydney at one of the First Nation reserves, in Membertou First Nation. It was in December of 2008 that I was asked to go there. And so after the Saturday night Mass, I put the image up and I talked about it. The residential school survivors did not want me to go talk to them because of what they lived at the residential school in Shubenacadie, which was run by the Catholic Church. So my cousins 5 of them came after, and at the end, they approached me, and they cried. They were crying. You know, these are your cousins. I said, I'm sorry, is there something here I said that you're angry and upset about? You know what their response was? Our tears are for joy. We didn't know that the Blessed Mother appeared as an indigenous woman in 1531, spoke an indigenous language, and helped the indigenous people of that area of Mexico. And this is the one they tell. Why didn't the priest and the nuns tell us about this? It would have brought us respect, dignity, and hope, rather than the pain, degradation, and abuse that we suffered. I'm going to read that again, so it'll be implanted in your minds. Why didn't the priests and the nuns tell us about this? It would have brought us respect, dignity, and hope, rather than the pain, degradation, and abuse that we suffered. The following 3 summers, when the residential school survivors continued to meet, they invited me to go and share the story of Our Lady Guadalupe. And I did so, and they could relate with the pain that the Aztecs and indigenous people in Mexico were suffering at that time, and how they had suffered, and how they say, yes, we accept. So I will go toward the end. I'm a little bit long-winded, John. So anyway, I'm on the last page, so there you go. Acts 10, 34 to 37. And the Acts, of course, are after the resurrection of Jesus, right? We're just in that Pentecostal season within our Catholic faith. Here's what Acts 10, 34 and 37 states. Again, it would have been known to the Spaniards in every Catholic country. Then Peter asked them, the truth I have come to realize, he said, is that God does not have favorites, but that anyone of any nationality who fears God, that's not love, and does what is right is acceptable to him. It is true, God sent his word to the people of Israel, and it has been to them that the good news of peace was brought by Jesus Christ. But Jesus Christ is Lord of all. Jesus Christ is Lord of all. So had those early missionaries and the church leaders realized that Jesus was for us, as he was for any other nationality, all this could have been avoided. So maybe now in our country, among our Christian brothers and sisters, they'll say, what can we do? What can we do on that path of reconciliation? And then I say this, we need voices in the wilderness right now. Indigenous and non-Indigenous communities of all faiths. We have to have the courage, the grace, and the strength, like Fray Montesinos, Bartholomew de las Casas, Francisco Vittoria, and Pope Paul III. They can do it. They did it. Why can't we do it? That's always my question. Why not, you see? Because it can be done if we take it to prayer. And if we pray as brothers and sisters, Indigenous and non-Indigenous alike. Because nobody wants to remain in that area of pain. It's difficult, very difficult. You can't sleep well, you can't eat well. You just say, is there any hope? So that's what I do. And I want to close with this prayer, again, to Our Lady Guadalupe. Mother of the very true God, and our merciful Mother, who by your appearance at Tepeyac has shown God's special care for Indigenous peoples. Intercede with your Son, we pray, that the wounds of colonization, particularly those afflicted by representatives of His Holy Church, be healed. That we may participate in this healing, and that all your children grow in love, reverence, and for our common dignity, and for our Creator. Holy Virgin of Guadalupe, pray for us. Thank you very much.